welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely beautiful book. It was such an honor to read and such a pleasure to read, and I am so excited to speak with its author. So, welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Absolutely. So my name's Meg Hamand, and my debut novel is Diamonds in Auschwitz, which follows the story of two different sets of characters about 2 years apart. So it's a dual timeline. And the inspiration was, what if you found a diamond ring in the mud outside of the gates of Auschwitz? Like, how would that change your life? Even though it can't feed you, it can't clothe you, it can't get you out of the camp, but how could something so beautiful and precious wake you up to the world around you and give you kind of meaning in life? And then the other question is, how did it get there, and what happened to the woman who originally had it? So that's what the two timelines are following, is the woman who picked it up and the woman who was given it as her proposal, right? Like, this is her engagement ring, and what happened to her that the ring ends up in the mud outside of Auschwitz.
I really love the way that the two narratives are interthreaded and the way that they speak to each other and, bounce off of each other in some ways. It is so interesting. But before we get to the book itself, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer, how you came to writing, and what led you to this project.
Okay, great. So I've always wanted to be a writer. I remember when I was 10, I had a notebook filled with like Lisa Frank stickers on the front, and I wrote a memoir, had my appendix taken out. It was the most dramatic thing that had ever happened to me. So I assumed everyone wanted to read it. It was not any good. So that just always, that I always remember writing that little notebook. And so having my stories told around the world has always just been a dream of mine. So went to school at Indiana State University. I'm a Hoosier. To major in English with creative writing and journalism minors. And then almost immediately out of college, took a job at a bank. So we've been doing finance ever since then, wanting to get back into writing. And the story came to me, Diamonds in Auschwitz came to me like a bolt of lightning. I had been dabbling around with some other ideas, didn't even start writing any other book ideas. I had a blog at the time. I was, fiddling with like a mom blog. It was supposed to be kind of like a funny thing because my child at the time was crazy and always doing funny things. And I enjoyed that, but that wasn't really where I wanted to be. And so I had read Wendy Holden's Born Survivors, which is a nonfiction book about women who went into Auschwitz pregnant and gave birth. And so the book is very cool. And the point was not about this ring, but she mentions very briefly that one of the women had held onto her engagement ring. And as she's entering Auschwitz, she's like, I am not letting the Nazis have this ring. I held onto it all this time. And so she just drops it on the ground. And then the novel moves on, the book moves on. And I'm like, whoa, can we go back to the ring? What happened to the ring? What happened to the woman who picked it up? And so then really Diamonds in Auschwitz with the two storylines just came to me all at once. Quit working on the blog because I didn't have time for everything, and really focused on this book. And here we are. Now it's published, and it's, thank you for saying it was beautiful. I think the cover is really beautiful. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of it.
It is a beautiful cover and a beautiful book. Everything about it is beautiful. I'm curious about you talked about the origins of the story. I'm really curious about your approach to historical fiction, what it was that, drew you to that genre in particular, and if perhaps you feel like your journalistic training and skills played a role at all, because historical fiction involves research, and I'm wondering if that was like part of what drew you in.
Absolutely. So I've always been a classics girl. So I always like to read the old classics, which really you could consider as historical fiction now. It just wasn't historical when it was written. And then I love historical fiction. I love historical nonfiction. Like Eric Larson is one of my favorite writers. So I just love that. And I really get intrigued with tidbits like in Wendy Holden's book, just this ring. And it was so small, and that was not the point of the story, but I really wanted to know more about it. So that's how I get a lot of the inspiration for the ideas that I have for historical fiction writing. But you're right, the journalist is coming out of me. When I was in college, I said I wanted to write historical nonfiction or creative nonfiction. I was really obsessed with Truman Capote's In Cold Blood because it was kind of the first of that genre. And again, like I said, I love Eric Larson. So that was what I thought I wanted to do. That is so much work. I can't imagine how much research these writers are putting into their books, and that's what you have to do to write a historically accurate book like that. I work full time. I've got a 13-year-old daughter who's in like every activity under the sun. I don't have time for that. So I almost kind of joke that historical fiction is like the lazy man's way of doing this. I get to research, I get to be as accurate as I want, but then I also can make it up. So, if the timeline doesn't really kind of fit what I think is going to work and be a little bit more exciting, I can mess around with the timeline. I can create characters and thoughts and dialogue completely out of nothing, and that's still okay. But I did a lot of research for this book because I do want it to be really representative of the time period and the situation, especially in something so sensitive and important as the Holocaust. So I did a lot of research on what it was like to live in Terezin, which is the ghetto, the Jewish ghetto outside of Prague. Obviously, what it was like to be in Auschwitz. I did a lot of research about Nazi brutality because I'm a pretty sunshiny person. So coming up with some of these terrible scenes that are in Diamonds at in Auschwitz did not come natural to me. So all of the Nazi brutality is really based in fact and things that I had read. So research has been really important, but I like being able to make up other things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I kind of like about historical fiction is that you can access like the truth that is in the history books, but there are th places where you can sort of fudge that or play with it, which helps you
Mhm.
get it like a different kind of truth, like an emotional truth or something
Right. The
like
essence of the story
that.
is accurate. And I also really appreciate when I read historical fiction when the author is like, okay, these events are based in fact. This is what I made up. This is what I think happened based off my research, but I don't know it, so I'm just going to write it anyways. So, don't skip ahead to the author's note if you haven't read Diamonds in Auschwitz, but it does go through like there are certain scenarios and some characters that are 100% fact that I tried to be very authentic to in my book. So I note that in the author's notes. So if you later you're like, okay, what of this is true, you can find out.
You just mentioned before in your answer the depictions of the brutality of the Nazis, both in the camps and in the ghettos as they were sort of gradually restricting these people's movement and things like that. That that's a hard place to dwell, especially if you are like an optimist, as you've said. So are there things you did to support yourself through that research or writing, or what was your, um, how did you keep yourself productive and like in a good state of mind while working on such difficult material?
Yeah, I really had to set it down after I wrote some of those tough scenes. I remember texting my sister once and I said, I just wrote a scene and I made myself sob. And she's like, I think it's time to walk away. So really having to take breaks. And I think I mentally prepared myself to write those scenes for days ahead of time. Like I was thinking through it. I think I had all the words in my head. I just needed to put it down on paper. So I was very thoughtful about it and took my time and then shut the lid of the laptop, walked away, like literally would go out maybe for a walk, do something completely different. I also found that as I was writing this book, there were times when the books that I was reading would gravitate towards World War II because I think you just immerse yourself in that time. But then there were other parts where I'm like, no, I cannot read, I cannot write any more World War II. And then that's the time when, like a good Emily Henry comes out and you're just like, I just need to like not think and just enjoy this. So I think my mood was being watched over by what books I was reading. So I had to pick what I needed to hear.
Nice. Yeah, that's really interesting and strategic, because yeah, some research is important and it's good to keep your head in that zone, but also you need to sort of get out of it every once in a while for your own mental health and for, to get the creative juices flowing. I think looking at different things can help the process too. So,
Yeah. Yeah. There's also the risk too that sometimes I've read so much World War II historical fiction that I'm like, did I come up with this scene or did I read it 10 years ago? And so I had to be really like thoughtful too of like, okay, where am I coming? Where is this coming from? Is this coming deep from inside me? And so sometimes then I would veer away from World War II books at that time because I didn't want to be influenced, you know, subconsciously with what I had just read because I know so many writers are doing it better than I am.
Let's talk a little bit about the characters. First, I'd love to talk about Rachel.
Mhm.
You could talk about shaping her character, and the young girl that she meets in the course of her story.
Yeah. It's funny when I first started this book, in my mind, the main characters were Hannah and Samuel, which is different. And now, as I go through it more and as I talk to people about it who have read the book, Rachel and Haya are really like they're the reason we're reading this book, I think. So Rachel is the woman who finds the ring in the mud outside of Auschwitz. And right from the first few pages, I'm not giving anything away. She basically tells you like she's lost her entire family, three kids and a husband. They're all gone from her. And so she is living in this fog in Auschwitz, just waiting to die, wants to die, doesn't want to talk to anybody. And she gets this ring and it wakes her up, whether she wanted it to or not. And now she's aware. And so pretty quickly on, she meets Haya, which is a 9 or 10-year-old little girl recently brought into Auschwitz after spending many years in the cellar of a Christian family hiding from the Nazis. So Haya's got nobody and really is this is, don't take this the wrong way. She was a fun character to write because she's in this awful situation, but she doesn't know anything about the world because she spent all of her time in the cellar. So even later, she talks about, like, I know that I'm not supposed to like it here, but I kind of like it here because I get to see the sunshine and I get to talk to people and I get to stretch my legs, and it's better than when I was in the cellar. So it was nice to be able to show this awful time period in life from these eyes of a child who was curious and playful, and you just really couldn't beat down that like innocent spirit. So Rachel, of course, gets won over pretty easily by Haya, and they have like a surrogate mother-daughter relationship that really drives that side of the narrative.
Yeah, what you think at first is sort of like clashing perspectives or approaches to their situation, I think ends up really being complementary. Like they're both bringing something that the other person needs to their relationship, and
Mhm.
watching that develop is really, really beautiful.
Yeah, and this was added at the very end. One of my favorite parts is Rachel has refused to talk to her bunkmate, woman who sleeps underneath of her, won't talk to her, won't talk to her. 2 minutes, Haya's in the scene, and she's like, "Hi, I'm Haya. This is Rachel. Who are you?" And Rachel's like, "Ugh, I've been trying to build this wall to separate myself from all these people, and this girl just came in like a wrecking ball and just crashed it all." And then Rachel's resigned to it, right? Like, I guess I really need to be living my life again. So I think that's just so typical of children, right? Doesn't matter if you're in the middle of World War II in a concentration camp, like kids are going to be kids. And I like having that character in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed her presence. Let's talk about Samuel and Hannah, who you mentioned briefly before. I'd love to talk about shaping their story and their relationship. Um, and how do I phrase this? How much you knew going in about how their stories would interact and how much came out in the drafting process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I actually wrote both storylines separate. So I wrote all of Hannah and Samuel's storyline. And I knew like I knew there were parts where they were going to meet Rachel and Haya. So I had a couple of those connections already in my head. And then I wrote Rachel and Haya's completely. And then as I was editing it together, I added a few more connections because that's really what everybody wants to see, right? You're so invested in these two separate characters. You don't want them to be separate. You want them to come together. I do think I try to make the readers work for it a little bit. So hopefully it's rewarding. I was at a book club once and a woman came up and she's like, okay, and basically listed every single time the characters were connected in some way. And she's like, "Did I get it right?" And I was like, "You did, you got it right." And so she was so excited. And I kind of, I didn't want to beat anyone over the head with it. I wanted them to work for it a little bit. And also, like, Rachel and Hannah don't know their connections, and they didn't know when they're necessarily crossing paths. So I wanted to keep that like very realistic.
Yeah. And I think that plays in like thematically, to the story really beautifully because like stories are important to Rachel and Haya's relationship.
Mhm.
And obviously stories are important to storytelling and to novels, but I think like what we're reminded of is that like because they never know about each other's stories, like we really never know the meaning of our own story, because
Yeah.
like, stories get their meaning when they end. And so there's something that's both like I don't know, something to me that's sort of weirdly comforting about that is that like you don't
Yeah.
really know like what the actions that you take, the relationships that you form, what they're going to mean. And that's okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting to almost get like a bird's eye view of it and see then, how what someone says and to see these interactions from different points of view.
Totally. Um,
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about, how in the book, how you treat survival. Because I think we're really talking about like two different kinds of survival here. There's like the
Mhm.
physical act of surviving and remaining alive, like day to day. But there's also like you know, the the wanting to be alive. And
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
those are like different characters are operating on different levels throughout the story. So could you talk about like your approach to that?
Yeah, I think living on was a big part of the story. And I'm sorry, Samuel and Hannah have kind of a saying that they start out as a joke, but it ends up being like their tagline, and it's the Nazis can't kill all of us. And it was a very purposeful set of words because the idea is they can't kill all of us at first as his entire population. Like they can't kill all of these people. Well, then it comes to the point where like actually maybe they can, but they can't kill every bit of us, right? We're going to live on whether it's through our family members or, Hannah's an artist, so it's through the art that she leaves on. And so that's really what I wanted to get on is survival is different. Like you might die, but something lives on. And I mean, that's really important in the Jewish culture. And I love Leon Uris, who's a wonderful writer. And he wrote Mila 18, which is about the Jewish uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. And that's a big part of it. It's like, we know we're not getting out of this, but can we get the papers out? Can we get the history, the written history of our people out and have that survive? So that's a really big part of it. And that's why, the ring is symbolizing this resiliency and this hope because no matter what, it keeps going. And so I just really like that idea of living on in people's memories and thoughts and works of art.
Yeah, absolutely. And also like surviving as resistance too, like
Yes.
I don't think this is revealing too much because it's literally like in the first few pages, but there's a part early on where, Rachel is being brutalized and she's like, I'm telling my legs to fall, and they won't. I just keep
Yeah.
standing. And
Yeah.
there is something about that refusal to sort of like give in to whatever terrible thing is happening to you that is also, I think, imbues what you're doing with meaning?
Yeah. Yeah. And Hannah trying to hold on to the ring is and she's like, I'm not actually hurting the Nazis by doing this. But for her, it was giving her this little tiny bit of purpose, this little bit of rebellion that she could hold on to that says, I thwarted their plans. Their plan was to take everything from me, and I still have this. And so yeah, it doesn't have to be this huge act of resistance that I, blew up the crematoriums, which did happen in Auschwitz at the end of the war. It can just be something like I held on to this ring or I befriended a child and made her life a little bit easier when you're trying to make it as terrible as possible.
Absolutely. Gosh, well, I am so excited for our patrons to read this book and to read whatever's next. So I understand that you have a manuscript in progress. Are you able to tell us anything about that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's with a wonderful editor that worked on Diamonds in Auschwitz with me right now. So first draft, second draft is kind of done. It takes place in Charleston after the Revolutionary War. So totally different, but still historical fiction and still inspired by, I heard just a little tidbit about some characters in Charleston. And actually, it's It's like an origin of a haunted legend in Charleston. And I kind of heard a little bit about this woman, and I was like, ooh, I want to know more about her. And how did she end up to be part of this legend that lives on, 200, 300 years later? So I decided I'm just gonna write it. So it talks a little bit about life after the Revolutionary War, a little bit about life during the Revolutionary War. If you're in Charleston, it's got feminism, it's got slavery, and it's overlaid on the retelling of a Shakespeare tragedy. So I put a lot of things into a pot, mixed it up. I'm not really sure how it's going to taste when it comes out, but I'm excited. And it's different. It's got a little bit of a ghost and a little bit of a murder mystery to it.
Nice. Well, it sounds delicious, so I'm very
Thank
with that
you.
too. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much for telling us about your work and your career. I am so excited to share this novel with our patrons.
Thank you.
Um, Listeners, it's on you now. Please check out Diamonds in Auschwitz. It's out now. It will be out when you hear this. So head to your favorite bookstore or website or library, wherever you like to go for your books. All right, it's time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.